Okay, thank you very much for the kind invitation to speak here about our experience at PLOS One about implementing data availability policy. For me, one of the compelling arguments towards sharing data is actually the reuse that it allows. Open access that we practice at PLOS allows everybody to have access to research. Going beyond that towards open science, open data, allows everyone to do research with that data. And I think that opens up a whole lot of opportunities and perspectives going forward. It does require a very strong infrastructure. It does require credit for those that share the data. Otherwise, why would they do that? But at the same time, there's a lot of compelling arguments towards doing so. Some of the arguments are listed here, that it allows you to replicate, validate research that's published in a paper. It allows to do analysis that goes beyond the paper, which to me is another very strong, compelling argument. It brings in new ideas, how you can approach data. There might be entirely new discoveries that could happen. There could be better interpretation of the data or of the paper as it's published. It allows for inclusion in meta-studies in certain fields, which I think is another important point in sort of bringing data together that is collected from different researchers. It facilitates reproducibility, which along with replication, validation, is an important factor in publishing research. It allows scrutiny post-publication, which again plays into the argument of validation. And it's for those that fund it, it's simply a better return on investment of what they fund if there's more that can be done with the data that is published. And it's also in many areas it's a case that experiments are actually not so easy to do or to perform. Not many people have either the manpower, the means, or the access to it. If, like in the earth sciences on climate research, if there's an expedition to Antarctica, you can't do this kind of long-term studies easily, and sharing the data is crucial. Problems also that the data availability decreases with time. So this is a study that just asked authors of papers of a different age since publication whether they still have the data available, and sort of that shows that over the years the data that is available from different researchers decreases. So unless the data is actually published or deposited somewhere, it will simply disappear. And that again, that is another danger in not sharing the data. There's also platform changes, programs change. If you want to open a Word file that's been written 15 years ago, you probably can't because the format has changed, and so on. So at PLOS we have a fairly strong data sharing policy. So we ask authors, require them to make all data that's underlying their findings available on publication without restrictions and with only rare exceptions. So when the authors submit the paper, similar to what Springer Nature is doing, we ask them that they provide a data availability statement that describes this compliance with our policy. And as I mentioned, there's only a few exceptions where we don't request that the data is shared upon publication right away. It could be ethical or legal reasons, where, for example, the availability could compromise patient confidentiality. That's a very common reason, also for us, because we publish a fairly high amount of clinical research. But the other one are other threats. We don't want to publish locations of rare species, rare plants, rare animals, and this kind of data. Those are requests where we also understand that this kind of data cannot be shared publicly and can only be made available upon request. Yeah, but the policy overall has been implemented really successful for the last 3 years. So in that time frame, at least at PLOS One, we published more than 65,000 papers having such a statement and having the data available either within the paper on rare reasons on request or within repositories. And yeah, as I said, the implementation has been very successful. We did not have much sort of negative feedback from authors. I mean, of those submitting at least, less than 0.1% of the submissions are rejected at the initial screening because the authors are not willing to share the data as needed. So that is a small number. It's obviously only those that have been submitted to the journal. But it's, the data sharing policy does not really come up very much, sort of at least from my point of view, in the interactions with the authors that I'm having at the journal. The way the data is shared is that about 20% of the submissions use data repositories, and that has been increasing steadily over the years, which is a good number. It's still a bit low. It still could or should be higher. 60% of the papers declare that the paper is within the manuscript or within the supplementary information, so published by us. And about 20% is where the data is available on request. Those are those exceptions. And again, we publish a fair amount of clinical trials, so that is one of the chunks where data is only available on request. But overall, I mean, those are encouraging numbers, and they also demonstrated across the sciences. The data sharing is becoming more important, and policies implemented by us or other publishers, like Springer Nature, is making an impact. So that's another study that looks at data availability or data sharing policies across journals in the life sciences. And basically, the more blue the color on the left, the more stringent the data sharing policy is for a manuscript. And the researchers counted basically the fraction of the different policies. And so for all journals, this is the top line. The middle one is, if you just look at PLOS One. So we have across the history of what we published of all our archive, we now have quite a large fraction of the papers that have such a data availability statement as a condition of publication. And the last row is simply the same data as the above, but without PLOS One. So journals like ours or large publishers that have this kind of policy are making a lot of difference to science, to research. And we are driving this kind of publication of data, and I think that's very important that as publishers we get on board with such policies. So just to conclude, some of the challenges that I see is obviously data sharing is a very generic term. How does it work in practice? How does it work from research area to research area? In the clinical sciences, a problem. In high energy physics, there might be an issue in sort of the amount of data that is generated. What should be shared? What are good data release mechanisms, for example, for patient data? And sort of the community input is very important. At PLOS, we have a data advisory group that helps us with any issues arising on specific cases or with further developments of the policy. And I think that's very important that we have input from the different communities as to how data sharing would or could be implemented in their fields. As I mentioned at the beginning, I think data citations and mechanisms to provide author credit are really, really important. I think once the authors see that they can get credit for the data that they publish, probably a lot of the other issues that are there, like how does the community share the data, will probably resolve themselves, but we need to support the authors in sharing the data and giving them the credit through data citations, through other means. And one of the problems is, of course, sharing the data is all good and well. I mean, you can put up a PDF online, which is technically sharing data, but practically it's not. So it's very important that the metadata of the data that is shared is well described, follows community standards, that other people that look at the data know how to interpret it, that there's standards across communities on how data should be shared in certain fields and what constitutes data sharing. And it's not, also from our point of view, it's not always clear what constitutes compliance with data sharing. How deep do you have to go with sharing the research data? Is it just the data behind a figure, or is it all the data that it took in an experiment? And again, the answer might be different for different research fields. So by having the data availability policy at PLOS, we are hoping that we also encourage these kind of discussions, that we come across these kind of practical hurdles, and that along with the community we can contribute to resolving those and sort of increase the compliance with data sharing, that we bring up this 20% of sharing in repositories, that we bring this fraction of sharing up to higher degrees, that we have good metadata associated with all the shared data, that it's actually reusable and usable by others. Thank you.